Today, in the quiet suburbs of Miami, Florida, a tragedy shocked the local community. At around 11:15 p.m., what seemed like an ordinary evening turned into a nightmare at a gas station. A young boy, only 16 years old, was brutally murdered while working his shift. His life ended in an instant over what seemed like a trivial argument. What led to this horrific incident? Why did a simple conflict escalate into such a violent outcome? This story is filled with unexpected twists, and the truth that will soon be uncovered is far darker than anyone could have imagined. The night had started like any other for 16-year-old Alex Carter. Working the late shift at a gas station on the outskirts of Miami, he was used to dealing with all sorts of customers. His father, Mark, and older brother, Ryan, were there too, helping out during the quieter hours. It was a family-run business, and they took pride in their work. Around 11 p.m., a young man in his early 20s entered the store. He was scruffy-looking, with a slight swagger, and seemed agitated. He grabbed a can of beer and walked up to the counter. Alex noticed that the man didn't take out his wallet, and when he politely asked for payment, the man smirked and tried to walk out. Alex, trying to keep the situation calm, stepped in front of him. "Hey man, you gotta pay for that," he said, his tone firm but friendly. The man's expression changed, his eyes narrowing. Without warning, he shoved Alex back, almost knocking him into a display shelf. Ryan and Mark, hearing the commotion, rushed over. They tried to de-escalate the situation, asking the man to calm down. Tensions were high, but after a few tense moments, the man backed off. He even apologized, offering a half-hearted grin as he put the beer back. It seemed like everything had been resolved. The man even shook hands with Alex, mumbling an apology. For a moment, it looked like they had avoided a confrontation. But what the Carters didn't know was that this man had no intention of letting things go. As soon as he stepped out of the store, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Less than 20 minutes later, 3 cars pulled into the gas station parking lot, engines roaring and headlights cutting through the dark. 15 men got out, surrounding the place. They weren't here to buy gas or snacks. They had come for revenge. Alex, Ryan, and Mark barely had time to react. The men stormed in, fists flying and weapons in hand. Chaos erupted as punches were thrown and shelves were knocked over. Mark tried to shield his sons, but they were heavily outnumbered. It quickly became clear that this wasn't just about a can of beer. These men were here to send a message. Amid the chaos, Alex felt a sharp, searing pain in his side. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his shirt. One of the attackers had pulled out a knife. The world seemed to blur around him as he stumbled, his vision going dark. Ryan and Mark fought desperately, but the attackers didn't stop until they saw Alex collapse, his body lifeless on the cold, hard floor. As suddenly as they had appeared, the attackers fled, leaving the gas station wrecked and the Carter family shattered. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. Alex was pronounced dead at the scene. Mark and Ryan were left bruised, bloodied, and broken, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The news of the attack spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the community. What had started as a petty disagreement had escalated into a brutal killing. But why? What drove those men to such violence over something so small? And who was the man who had started it all? As the investigation began, detectives soon realized that this was not just a random act of violence. There was a deeper, darker story behind what happened that night at the gas station, and uncovering the truth would lead them down a twisted path, revealing secrets that no one could have predicted. Trying to seek justice, Mark went to the police but soon realized that the case hadn't even been opened for investigation. He began posting in local online forums, reaching out for help and attention. It turned out the situation was far worse than he had imagined. All the attackers were linked to mafia groups, and some of them had connections with the police. None of the authorities wanted to pursue the case or hunt down the criminals because they were protecting their own. While Mark and his family, overwhelmed by grief, were saying their goodbyes to Alex, the gangsters were not done. They found the house where Alex had lived and set it on fire. Fortunately, no one was inside, and the flames did not claim any more lives. But Mark was consumed with rage and fear. Why did these people do this? Why did they decide to destroy everything that was left of his son? He knew one thing: they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and he was ready to fight to protect his family and seek the truth. The entire town was in shock. The tragedy that took place at the gas station shook not only Alex's friends and family, but all the local residents. No one could believe that over a single bottle of beer, everything ended in such a brutal way. News of the attack spread quickly, and people were outraged that a young boy lost his life just for trying to do his job. The townspeople couldn't understand why a simple conflict had turned into such a violent incident. More and more people began to ask, what happened to the youth that they were willing to go to such extremes? Alex was just a teenager whose life was cut short by a senseless burst of violence. Anger and grief gripped the town, and residents demanded justice. If the police and authorities failed to find the culprits, people threatened to take to the streets in protests, calling for punishment for those responsible for the death of an innocent boy. As if the tragedy wasn't enough, the situation grew even more complicated. Shortly after the fire at Alex's house, ads and posts began appearing all over the internet about collecting donations to rebuild the home and support the family. People claimed the money would go to help Mark and Ryan, but it was all a lie. Mark and his family never planned to ask people for money, let alone organize any kind of fundraising. The situation was heating up, and the entire town was on the verge of an uproar. Mark knew he had to fight not only those who had killed his son, but also those who were trying to profit from his death. He was determined to do everything possible to ensure that the truth would prevail and that no one could take advantage of their suffering. After widespread public outcry, the police began to act more actively. They managed to arrest 7 out of the 15 attackers thanks to surveillance cameras. The criminals were taken into custody, but the story didn't end there. Mark's sister, Sarah, decided to personally ensure that the arrested individuals were indeed the ones involved in the attack on her nephew. She insisted on seeing them through the cameras at the station, and when she did, she was shocked by what she saw. The criminals who had brutally beaten and killed Alex did not appear remorseful. They sat in the cell, eating meat and acting as if nothing had happened. It became clear to Sarah that they were being kept in comfortable conditions, which meant they had support on the outside. After this, she gave an interview to journalists, in which she expressed her suspicions that these gang members had protection. According to her, they were being treated too well in the cell, and no one seemed eager to punish them to the full extent of the law. Sarah also declared that if she did not get justice for Alex, she was ready to take extreme measures, dousing herself in gasoline and setting herself on fire to draw attention to this injustice. These words came as a challenge to the system, and now all eyes were on Alex's case. Sarah began to actively use social media, detailing every step of the investigation and trying to let people know the truth about what was happening. She urged others not to remain indifferent and to demand justice alongside her, hoping that public pressure would force the authorities to act more decisively. Mark Carter was summoned to the police station for a conversation, but instead of offering real help or encouragement, they started playing a psychological game with him. The police tried to convince him that the investigation would take time and that he needed to be patient. They spoke to him coldly, almost without emotion, trying to prey on his fears and feelings. You need to think not only about yourself, Mark, but also about your family, about your children and your wife. We understand that you want justice, but right now, you risk putting them in danger. We are working on this case, but we need more time. Let the system do its job, one of the officers said. These words felt like a threat, disguised under a thin veil of concern. Mark could sense that they were trying to break him, to make him stay silent. He left the station feeling a heavy weight on his heart and an overwhelming emptiness. His rage, anger, and desire to get justice for his son began to turn into icy cold indifference. They were trying to make him indifferent, but he knew he had to keep fighting, despite the pressure. As the investigation continued, the police detained 7 suspects connected to the attack at the gas station. However, one of the parents of the detainees decided to speak out publicly in defense of his son. He recorded a video message and posted it online, hoping to change public opinion. "My son is innocent," the man began, his voice firm. That night, he was with friends in a cafe, just sitting and drinking beer. He didn't plan any attack and had no idea what was going to happen. He received a call asking him to come to the gas station. He didn't know there would be a fight. The man claimed that his son was caught up in the situation by chance and that he had no part in the violent attack. However, his words only raised more questions. If what he said was true, then who organized the attack and why? Who made that call that led to the tragedy? The public remained puzzled. Many didn't believe the excuses, convinced that all those detained were guilty, but the video message sparked a new wave of discussion. The questions kept piling up, and the truth about that fateful night became even more tangled. Mark received unexpected support from the locals. Several lawyers offered their services for free. After widespread resonance and chaos in the community, rumors began to circulate online about the area where the tragedy occurred. People said that this neighborhood had always been criminal and that it was rife with banditry. According to rumors, the most influential person in these parts was a certain Tyson, the head of a local organized crime group. Locals claimed that it was his men who were involved in Alex's murder. These conversations only fueled interest in the case, and pressure on the authorities continued to grow. People demanded answers. Who was Tyson, and why weren't his possible connections to criminals being investigated more thoroughly? Mark, Alex's father, insisted that the criminal case be transferred to another state. He feared that the investigation could be closed due to influence and bribery. Mark was afraid that his son's murderers might escape punishment and go free. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, he appealed to the president himself to take the case under personal control to ensure justice and prevent the guilty from evading responsibility. The story gained new resonance when facts about Tyson emerged. It turned out that his older brother held a powerful position in the police, while his younger brother was already serving time in prison. Soon, Mark received an unexpected call. Tyson's younger brother called him from prison and warned, "Be quiet, don't make a fuss." This sounded like a clear threat aimed at silencing Mark and deterring him from his fight for justice. After the threatening call from Tyson's younger brother, Mark decided not to remain silent. He gave an interview to the local news, where he detailed the events leading up to his son's murder and expressed his concerns about Tyson's possible influence on the investigation. He also mentioned that he had video footage from a surveillance camera that could shed light on what happened. Soon after the interview, when Mark was expecting help from the investigation, he learned that the video recording had been erased. The investigator handling the case claimed it was due to technical reasons, but Mark couldn't believe it was a coincidence. It was too suspicious, and he was sure someone had deliberately destroyed evidence to protect Tyson and his gang. This news quickly spread across social media. People who learned about what happened were horrified. Thousands of comments expressed anger and support for Mark. The community demanded justice, and many began organizing protests to draw attention to the case and make it clear to the authorities that they would not tolerate lawlessness. Among the activists supporting Mark was Lisa, a journalist who was also shocked by the police's actions. She began an investigation, gathering information about the investigator who erased the video and his possible connections to Tyson. Lisa did everything she could to expose corruption within the police, and bring attention back to Alex's case. Under pressure from the public and the media, the police were forced to launch a new investigation. They appointed an independent commission to review the investigators' actions and investigate possible corruption ties. Mark felt that something was finally starting to change. He continued to work with Lisa, gathering evidence and testimonies that could help in their fight for justice. Each new day brought new hopes and new dangers, but Mark was determined not to give up. After the resonance in the community and active protests, Tyson unexpectedly reached out. He recorded a video message that quickly spread across social media. In the video, he smugly explained that he had nothing to do with Alex's murder. Tyson claimed that he was not a thug, but a successful businessman who supposedly helped local residents. "I have never been involved in crimes," he said, confidently looking into the camera. "My enterprises create jobs, and I always support those in need. I care about my neighborhood, and my only goal is to protect its residents." As evidence of his good intentions, Tyson brought in several local residents who, according to him, received help from him. They stated that he provided them with jobs and assisted them in difficult times. However, many viewers immediately suspected that this was a carefully planned PR stunt. Skeptical locals began discussing the video on social media. "How can we trust a man with such questionable connections?" They wrote in the comments, "Maybe this is just an attempt to intimidate us and distract attention from the real issues." Mark, seeing this video, felt his anger boiling. He was convinced that Tyson was trying to manipulate public opinion to avoid responsibility for his role in his son's murder. Together with Lisa, they decided not to let this move go unanswered. While researching Tyson's past, Lisa came across evidence that contradicted his claims. She discovered documents confirming his connections to criminal groups, as well as witnesses willing to tell the truth about his activities. "We need to show that his words are just a smokescreen," Lisa said as they met in a cafe to discuss their plans. "If we can expose him in a negative light, people will understand who he really is." Having gathered all the necessary materials, they decided to hold a press conference where they would present evidence that refuted Tyson's statements. But they didn't know that Tyson had already learned of their intentions and was preparing to confront them. Finally, the day of the press conference arrived. Mark and Lisa were determined to show the public Tyson's true face. They invited local media to share their findings and debunk the myth of the noble businessman. At the same time, Tyson was preparing for his counterattack. He gathered his supporters and contacted several local television channels to present his version of events. When the press conference began, there was already a palpable tension in the room. Mark was the first to approach the microphone. He detailed the facts surrounding the incident, how the evidence had been erased, and how his family had suffered from Tyson and his people's actions. "We cannot let him manipulate public opinion. He is not a protector, he is a criminal," he proclaimed, his voice filled with emotion. Next, Lisa took the floor. She presented evidence documents and witness testimonies that refuted Tyson's claims about his noble activities. Tyson is not just a businessman. He is the leader of a criminal gang that uses fear and intimidation to maintain control over the neighborhood, she said, displaying photographs and documents on the screen that supported her words. The room filled with murmurs as people began exchanging glances, discussing the information presented. But at that moment, Tyson unexpectedly interrupted them. He stormed onto the stage, filled with rage, his face contorted in anger. "This is all lies," he shouted. "You can't believe these liars. I'm doing more for this city than any of you." A scandal erupted as Tyson tried to turn the situation to his advantage, accusing Mark and Lisa of attempting to tarnish his name. He claimed that their actions would only harm the community and distract people from the real problems. But instead of intimidating the public, his outburst only fueled the anger among the residents. People began shouting questions, demanding proof of his claims. "Then why do you have such questionable connections? Why won't you answer our questions?" they asked. Realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control, Tyson attempted to leave the press conference, but he was stopped. At that moment, the police became involved, acting more decisively under public pressure. An independent commission was brought in, and Mark, seizing the moment, declared, "We will not stop until we achieve justice. Tyson must answer for his crimes." The community rallied around Mark once again, and soon new testimonies and evidence began to emerge in the city. Tyson, realizing that his time was running out, began to panic. He decided that extreme measures were necessary to maintain his power. Meanwhile, Mark and Lisa continued to gather information, understanding that the case was far from over. They began planning their next step in the fight, filled with hope but aware that many dangers lay ahead. Let me know if you need any further adjustments or additions. After the press conference where Tyson attempted to turn the situation to his advantage, the police unexpectedly made a sensational announcement. They had recovered the surveillance video, which, it turned out, had not been erased, but was simply unavailable for analysis for some time. When the video was finally presented to the public, it shocked everyone. The footage showed a scene in which Mark appeared to be in a state of extreme agitation, holding a knife in his hands. The clip suggested that he had engaged in a confrontation with a group of hooligans who were believed to have killed his son. In the video, Alex tried to calm his father but looked very distressed. A scandal erupted. Many began to interpret the video as if Mark had provoked the conflict, allegedly leading to his son's death. The public was confused. How could a father be guilty of such a tragedy? Yet the recordings cast a shadow of doubt. Mark was horrified. This can't be true. He shouted when the video aired on the news. He knew the video had been taken out of context and that he had only been trying to protect his son. But now his life was on the brink of destruction. Lisa, realizing that the video could be a manipulation, decided to conduct her own investigation. She began analyzing the recordings and gathering evidence to confirm that Mark was not the instigator of the conflict. Meanwhile, a wave of negative comments surged on social media. People were divided into two camps. Some supported Mark and claimed that his testimony had gone unheard, while others demanded that he be punished for what they believed was his role in the tragedy. Understanding that he needed to act quickly, Mark decided to reach out to the public again. He recorded a new video message detailing his version of events and emphasizing that he'd only been defending his son. He also urged people to be cautious and not jump to conclusions based on incomplete information. In the meantime, Tyson, seeing that the situation was turning unfavorable for him, decided to take action. He realized he could use the situation to his advantage and attempted to incite conflict between Mark and the community by spreading false rumors about his guilt. Lisa and Mark knew they had little time. They needed to find true evidence that could debunk the false accusations and help restore Mark's reputation while Tyson continued his game. The conflict between Mark and the public continued to escalate. Despite all his efforts, the video had created a strong sense of distrust, and it seemed like everyone was against him. People discussed the footage at every corner and every day. The news was filled with new speculations about Mark's role in the tragedy. Meanwhile, Lisa delved deeper into her investigation. She began analyzing the original video frame by frame, trying to find evidence of manipulation or editing. Soon, her efforts started to pay off. She discovered inconsistencies in the video, timestamps and moments that had clearly been cut out. Lisa also met with several witnesses who were near the scene on the day of the tragedy. They told her they saw the thugs with weapons, but did not see Mark initiate the attack. According to them, the conflict erupted suddenly, and Mark was only trying to protect his son. However, these testimonies had not yet been considered in the official investigation. Lisa knew this wasn't enough. Tyson continued to fan the flames, actively using his connections in the media and on social networks to discredit Mark. He posted again, calling Mark a dangerous man and accusing him of aggressive behavior. Tyson even tried to portray himself as the victim, claiming that it was his good intentions that Mark was trying to destroy. Mark was desperate, but he refused to give up. One evening, he met with Lisa and said, "We need something decisive. Something that can show the whole truth without distortion." Lisa suggested bringing in an independent digital expert to prove that the video had been altered. They arranged to meet with the expert, who agreed to help expose the forgery. As soon as the expert began examining the original footage, he immediately noticed that some frames had been replaced, and key moments where the thugs were holding weapons had been deliberately removed. This could be evidence that the video was intentionally tampered with to frame Mark as the culprit. However, it was clear that revealing this information would not be easy. Tyson learned that Lisa and Mark had started collaborating with the expert and decided it was time to take extreme measures. He set up a scheme to intimidate Lisa and force her to stop her investigation. One night, Lisa noticed she was being followed. She decided not to panic and drove home, trying not to show that she had noticed the pursuers. But this made her realize they were close to uncovering the truth, and Tyson was willing to do anything to keep it hidden. Lisa and Mark decided to act quickly. They reached out to independent media outlets they could trust and arranged to publish an expose about the video manipulation. While they were preparing the material, Lisa started contacting lawyers to ensure that, if needed, she and Mark would be protected. Lisa and Mark understood that time was running out for them. Tyson was acting aggressively, and the pressure on them was increasing with each passing day. Despite this, they decided not to back down and continued preparing the article that could change the course of the case. Meanwhile, the independent digital expert completed his work and confirmed what Lisa had already suspected. The video had indeed been altered. The original footage, which the police had allegedly accidentally recovered, had been deliberately edited to portray Mark as the aggressor. The expert found traces of digital manipulation and preserved metadata indicating that key moments had been cut out. With this evidence, Lisa and Mark decided to hold a second press conference, but this time they wanted it to be even bigger. They reached out to several major independent publications and television channels that agreed to cover their presentation. Their goal was simple: to present the public with evidence of the forgery and expose Tyson and his accomplices' actions. Before the press conference, Lisa received another alarming piece of news. One of the witnesses who was supposed to testify in Mark's favor suddenly refused to participate, citing threats against him. This was a clear sign that Tyson was willing to do anything to maintain his power. But Lisa and Mark could not allow fear to stop them. When the day of the press conference arrived, the room was filled with journalists and activists who had been following the case from the beginning. Mark began his speech by recounting the grief he had endured and how he felt when he learned he was being accused of his son's death. He spoke with pain, but also with determination to fight for justice. Then Lisa approached the microphone. She thoroughly explained the results of the expert's work and presented evidence of the video manipulation. Footage that had not been shown before appeared on the screen, scenes where the thugs were armed and initiated the attack. Lisa also presented documents indicating a connection between Tyson and several corrupt police officers who helped cover up the truth. The room gasped as this evidence emerged. Journalists began to ask questions, and the atmosphere grew tense. Suddenly, Tyson appeared on the screen again, this time with a pre-recorded video message. He claimed that this was all a fabrication, that Lisa and Mark had hired fake experts to cast him in a bad light. He declared it a conspiracy against him and that he would defend himself by all legal means. But his words no longer had the same effect as before. Now that Mark and Lisa had real evidence, Tyson's manipulations looked like pathetic attempts to save his reputation. Many journalists began directing questions at Tyson himself, and his responses sounded increasingly vague and unconvincing. After the press conference, it seemed that the truth was starting to prevail. But the next day, something unexpected happened that completely overturned the situation. The news reported that one of the key witnesses, ready to testify against Tyson and confirm the video tampering, had been found dead in his apartment. The police quickly declared it a suicide, but Mark and Lisa knew that wasn't the case. The witness was too determined and prepared to fight to leave this world so suddenly. This death sparked a wave of fear and confusion. Many of Mark's supporters began to wonder, if even the witnesses were not safe, could they ever achieve justice? The police insisted that the investigation would continue, but the public started to suspect that they were either unable or unwilling to uncover the truth. An atmosphere of fear spread, and people began to lose hope. Mark was shaken. He knew that the witness's death was not an accident, but the result of someone trying to hide the truth about Tyson. He realized that he and Lisa needed to act quickly and decisively. Lisa, continuing her own investigation, found several details that had previously gone unnoticed. She discovered that just days before his death, the witness had received an anonymous message with threats, and another one trying to bribe him to withdraw his testimony. Meanwhile, a heated discussion began on social media. Citizens were frightened, but also angry that the truth about Tyson was once again on the brink of disappearing. Support for Mark began to grow, and people demanded a complete independent review of all details of the case. However, among the commentators, fake profiles started appearing, spreading rumors and attempting to tarnish Mark and Lisa's reputations by hinting at their alleged connections to crime. It was at that moment that Lisa received an unexpected call. An unknown voice suggested she meet in one of the abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of town. "I know who killed the witness," the voice said before hanging up. Despite all the risks, Lisa decided to go to the meeting. She didn't know what awaited her, but she understood that this could be a chance to uncover the truth that could topple all of Tyson's cards. Mark was against the idea, but Lisa convinced him that they had no other choice. "We can't just wait anymore," she said. "If we have even the slightest chance to find out the truth, we have to try." Mark agreed, but insisted that they wouldn't go alone. He enlisted his friends to ensure their safety in case it was a trap. In the abandoned warehouse, they were met by a masked man who was clearly nervous. He said he had previously worked for Tyson and knew too much. He had seen how some police officers were bribed, how evidence was falsified, and how witnesses were eliminated. But most importantly, he was ready to tell them everything if he was guaranteed protection and anonymity. He knew that if his name became known, he would be the next victim. "Do you think Tyson will just give up?" he said. "He knows too much and is capable of doing anything to maintain his influence. But I can give you recordings, conversations, documents. That's all he needs to silence you forever. If you can publish this, the truth will finally come to light." Lisa and Mark understood that this was a chance, but also a huge risk. Now they had evidence, but it meant they themselves were becoming the next targets. They decided not to delay and began preparing to publish this material through several independent media outlets to ensure safety and maximum impact. However, just as they were about to act, Tyson learned about the meeting and sent his men to find out who was behind the exposure. They found the masked man and without hesitation, killed him to leave no traces. Lisa and Mark realized that they were now in deadly danger. Nevertheless, they already had information that could undermine Tyson. They decided not to back down and prepared a press release about the revealed facts, including evidence of police bribery and evidence tampering. The publication was made, and the news quickly spread across all independent media. As soon as the information came to light, large-scale investigations began. Tyson and his team, including corrupt police officers, were arrested. It turned out that during his reign, many criminal cases had been closed, and their actions became the subject of judicial proceedings. People who had worked for Tyson began to testify against him to mitigate their sentences. At the trial, Mark and Lisa became the key witnesses. With each new fact and testimony, the atmosphere grew tense, and Tyson, feeling the ground slipping from under him, became increasingly uncertain. In the end, the court found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. When the verdict was announced, Mark could not hold back his tears. He embraced Lisa and said, "Take care of your children. My son Alex is a hero. Justice has been served." His words echoed in the courtroom. Good triumphed over evil, and this moment became a symbol of hope for everyone fighting for the truth. Mark turned to Lisa and thanked her for her help. "Without you, we would never have achieved this. You were my light in the darkest times." Lisa, feeling shy, smiled, realizing that they had done the impossible. Together, they had won this fight and could now look to the future with hope.